Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for Ackmed to arrive. This is Pr0totype, episode 61. I'm Pronago, and my solo game design podcast continues while we talk a little bit about what has happened for Cosmonarchy, the most ambitious StarCraft 1 project ever made. I think so. I would say with an exclamation point. Some people say it with a question mark. I'll leave it up to you to decide. Always links in the description. You know how this goes. But we are here to talk about a couple of things that have been going on with regards to the project in the past few weeks, and I will also be previewing the Fraud of July, which is an upcoming event for Cosmonarchy, a 1 versus 1 event. It's definitely our most populous 1 versus 1 event so far, and we're trying to squeeze it all into one day, so I'm sure it will be just perfect. Anyway, we do have some more stuff to do after that, a little bit of a community roundup, and then going straight into coffee questions. So by volume of topics, this is going to be a little bit of a short one. I hope you guys have been doing well in the absence of this show, but the daily casts have continued, so always a reason to stay subscribed and to check us out. And hey, if you like what you see, you like what we do, there's that coffee link in the bottom left that will bring you to our very own donation page where you too can support the efforts. But I'll go ahead and hide that for now. You can also find it in the description. We are going to get into our first big topic, and he's very large. It's Ackmed, and he is here. The one thing about Ackmed, I will say, that is kind of interesting is that Shambler actually was doing some testing of the heroes that have been added. The other heroes that are also on your screen there are Stralium and Goska from my long ago released In Consummate campaign. I'm just adding these heroes so that we have a little bit more going on for, maybe map makers can make use of them in some way or whatever. They have some unique abilities or attributes. And, for example, Ackmed has a stim pack, which eventually we'll end up renaming into something else, like, I don't know, Micken, Eat Micken or something. And then instead of stimming, like the stim sound, he'll play the like a munch noise or something. But anyway, he's obviously just a very like a rendered Huracan graphic that's like rendered to a higher file size or higher dimensions, and it's hilarious to see him try to fumble around. And so he's a bit slow, but he's beefy, dude. However, as Shambler was doing some testing, he was noticing that the heroes actually have very underwhelming stats compared to what you would normally see out of a hero. And the thing for me is that the stats, like I don't actually believe that heroes should have a lot of stats, a lot of innate HP and stuff. However, right now there is a bit of an annoying thing where because we don't have source code for SCM draft, we can't actually get it to recognize our extended data arrays. And as a result of that, we can't allow map makers to edit the intrinsic stats like HP of units. So we're going to have to work into some way of allowing that to be editable on a per unit basis at some point. That's going to be a bit of a headache to do. I've already sort of mapped that out, but it's like it's probably like several days of work. Would touch a lot of the game to the point where we'd have to be very, very judicious about like editing things correctly so that we don't break something. You know how it goes. So anyway, that's just something that I figured I would point out there. But eventually you'll be able to change Ackmed's health and other such things. Now, going into the other changes besides the heroes that make like a good thumbnail, but not maybe much else, we have done a lot of adjustments behind the scenes. Veek7 and myself have been working on the programming side, the back end. We've been trying to simplify and improve our process for handling changes. Well, simplify might be the wrong word because it's more complicated now, but the end result is that we have less basically all of us see all of the code that goes into the project, whereas, Veek would do something and I wouldn't necessarily know what code had been changed, and I would do something and he wouldn't see it, which is usually the bigger problem, because I'm not as inexperienced of a programmer as he is, but sometimes he might make a blunder that I could catch, and vice versa. And so, anyway, we're going through this pull request system as opposed to the idea of just changing stuff directly on the repository. And now it's going to be interesting to see what all these pipeline changes kind of result in. But it should allow us to catch issues before they actually impact end users. And so that has been undergone for the last week or so. Last couple of weeks, we've been sort of putting that system through its paces and really trying to learn it and seeing what the the limitations, the ramifications are. There are some things that are not so good about it that we both have run up against and said, oh well, I guess that's not it's not like a panacea. But I think the pros outweigh the cons here, and I am pro no go, not con no go. So check that out, I guess. The main thing I will say as well, outside of that, some of the changes that we have achieved that actually do impact the end users directly beyond just the nebulous, oh, there's less bugs than there would have been, is we've fixed a number of issues. We have, for example, just recently, Veek was able to make it so that Banter didn't play globally. Banter being the sort of unit transmissions that occur when, say, like a Hierophant, kills an enemy with maximum stacks of its passive, or is involved like near a unit that dies with maximum stacks. Then the Hierophant will say a Banter line. Now that we have a better system for that, where it's not going to be like global, like you'll be back at your base or you'll be spectating, and you're on the witness or replay mode, and you go to like the other guy's base while a fight is happening elsewhere, and you hear the fate of all fools, and you're like, what? What's going on? Why am I hearing that? So it should be less confusing in that respect. But now that we've done that, I think that will open the door for additional banter down the yardstick. So if we're thinking about like, I have these lines that I've recorded a long time ago for madcaps, actually, for when they get maximum stacks. And one of the lines is him going, "I am fully charged!" And, the idea of being able to hear stuff like that as banter would be pretty good. The banter system is a little bit more robust than it used to be in general, so we should be able to make something like that happen. The other one that's been bandied around recently in the Discord server, which I highly encourage anybody interested in Cosmonarchy to join, as we have a pretty active community. A lot of new players that are like kind of brand new to the project, actually, that'll be making their debut in the forthcoming tournament. And, a lot of people who are of varying skill levels, but also just people who are interested in talking about the project and maybe suggesting changes, even if they mostly play single player and stuff, right? So definitely a good set of people to talk with about the project and about our future work as well. And one of the things that was bandied about there was the Demiurge actually letting out some of its very unstoppable sound, unit responses when it like mind controls a bunch of units or something, right? So you could imagine that like we could do some sort of internal timer where the stacks of this like banter check occur for like, say if 10 units are controlled and dominated within 3 or 4 seconds or something, that might proc the banter so that it lets out this like terrifying scream of conquering. And that's pretty cool to think about. There's something like that. So the one thing that I always am trying to balance when I'm thinking about the banter is it's kind of a similar thought process to why like tier 3 isn't given to you by default and expansions aren't given to you by default in the actual game, is like you have to earn that, right? So I don't want to cheapen the idea of banter to be like, this should always happen. You should always hear it. That would definitely oversaturate the experience, I think. And so I think the banter in, lines should probably be a little bit rare. There's an open, I guess you could call it there's open conversation could be had, open debate could be had about, for example, like maybe the current banters that happen when the Patriarch debuffs a lot of units at once, or the Hierophant is near a unit that dies with the sacks. Maybe those actually already occur a little bit too frequently. If you extrapolate that out to say half the units in the game having some form of a banter line, or maybe all of them would have it. I don't know. I don't know what the significance would be, but I imagine it would vary on a case-by-case basis in terms of how common the banter would be. So if you have thoughts on the banter system, definitely throw them in here, talk about them in the server, etc., etc. These are things that I'm always interested in getting people's opinions on, because we'll test it out, and if it ends up sounding too much to our ears, we can always change it ourselves as developers. But definitely interested in the actual player base's feedback on that, because I don't know, is it something that's distracting to people? I mean, part of it is actually supposed to be a little bit of a psychological change where just like the Madrigal deploying and then shooting missiles at everything is like a part intimidation, and even if it's not so much damage because of your composition or something, it's kind of intimidating. We would want that kind of auditory aspect to come through, where when the Hierophant laughs at you for chasing down and killing something, you should kind of feel like, oh man, I'm getting fucking mocked, as well as there should be an element of that where it's imposing, in my opinion. So Anyway, I figured I would just bring that up as a thing that has recently changed and something that I've had some thoughts about with regards to the banter system. So, I don't think we would ever see a world where I would staunchly oppose a world where we have, say, a config option that disables banter, because I think that's actually kind of like buffing yourself. It's like it's avoiding this situation where you could get psychologically, a little bit nervous or a little bit put off by the fact that the units of your enemy are taunting you. It's not like the enemy player is doing it deliberately per se, although they might deliberately try to make sure that they like bring the Hierophant in so he can call you a coward. But besides that, like for the most part, there's not really like a deliberate way to make that happen. It's kind of like the banter is designed to reward or to capstone certain events that are actually about and revolving around optimal play. Like you should be targeting, stacks of clumps of units with Patriarchs because they deal splash and because of their debuff. And you should be, trying to make sure that Hierophants stack up their full passive because of the effects that you can get. I mean, maybe that one's a little bit more debatable because you might want the slows on a bunch of different units instead of the attack speed slow. You might want the movement speed slow and as many things as possible. But by and large, it's a good thing to do. And so anyway, I figured I would bring that up as like a thing that is kind of interesting, where we're trying to find like what is optimal play. What are plays that are like really good and ought to be rewarded, and we're kind of like leaving a little bit of a capstone on those events when they happen using banter. That's kind of how I would conceptualize it. And so because of that, it's not like your enemy player is like doing something deliberately to taunt you. It's more like they want to. Like when the Eidolon says you call down the thunder when it paints the nuke, like that's actually something that all players can hear if they're in the right area, which on its face might be like, well, aren't you screwing around with the stealth aspect of it? But like not really. I mean, I don't actually think that the stealth aspect of it should be like a big thing. I think it's more like, okay, it's more terrifying to hear you call down the thunder, and then like it's more satisfying for the player who's actually painting the Morning Star strike, the missile strike, to be like to hear the end of that, which is when the Eidolon says, "Now reap the whirlwind," as the missile starts to fall. And so that's a kind of like, it sounds weird to say, but it's almost like it feels like it should have always been like that. I know that sometimes you'll get into territory where you'll play a game of Cosmonarchy, or like people will see Cosmonarchy for the first time and they'll be like, holy shit, I feel like this is what, Brood War's sequel could have been, or like another Brood War expansion pack could have been. It's obviously much bigger than just a game, just like another StarCraft game or just another expansion pack or anything in terms of what it adds. But the kind of changes, the sort of tenor of the experience is almost like, if you were really, really nostalgic for Brood War but hadn't played it in a long time, that's sort of like what Cosmonarchy can feel like to some people. And so I think that's worth pointing out as a thing. And that's also one of the reasons why banter is so cool to me, because it's something that does feel a little bit more like, oh, yeah, of course, this is really epic. I would love to see more and more of that get added to the game, as long as it's tasteful, as long as we're not overdoing it and getting to the point where it's too many things, oversaturating it, because then you can't really think to yourself, and then it's beyond what we would actually want. But if like a Cantavis kills a bunch of units with one storm, it should probably have some sort of laugh line or some sort of taunt, right? Now, that's a little bit more difficult because as of right now, we haven't replaced the Cantavis's unit responses, and we might not do it ever, but that would be one thing that would be worth pointing out, is like, yeah, they don't actually have custom ones, so it's a little bit harder to do. But anyway, I figured I would point all that stuff out. It's interesting to me to think about stuff like that, and to try to imagine how to make the game feel even more thematically epic. Also, a tiny little baby spider just landed on my microphone and is now departing the microphone. The way that spiders walk and wiggle their limbs as they are like crawling along invisible to us, pieces of web or whatever, where it's like really hard to see what they're even on. It just looks like they're walking through the air. It reminds me of the Dalventhos from Xibalba, one of my many original creations. And their vehicles are planned to kind of ambulate that way, where they're just sort of like walking up cliffs and stuff, but like without actually making contact with anything physical that we can see. So anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there because it was literally right in front of me while I was finishing that banter point. So we do have a bunch of balance adjustments that have happened recently-ish. Worth pointing out things like the uptecton, where it's changed to be more like Vik had an idea for it, and I was able to merge his idea and suggestion with my thought process about how I felt like it should fire 10 shots instead of 5, and he thought the shots should have interception and go to max range, and they already had interception, but they didn't have the go to max range thing. Personally, I feel like there is value in keeping certain bullet mechanics unique to individual races. However, that's probably only feasible insofar as you have a small number of races. And since we're adding a 4th race, maybe it's a good thing to buck the trend of, max range being a Terran-only thing. The one places where it is available for Zerg is the Skithercore and the Lakizalisk, where they are sort of like return projectiles. I almost said boomerang, but that's like a very different pattern, where they go to their point and they come back. And so I feel like that is kind of interesting to think about, but it's also fundamentally like, it's still the same kind of thing. It's just it does something additional on top of that. Whereas I guess the max range intercept idea is unique to Protoss, actually. If you think about a Cantor plus Uptecton, they actually technically have the same sort of missile behavior. It's just that the Cantors is much slower, as you have all no doubt known. So anyway, I figured I'd point that out. The Uptecton has been changed. One of Neblim's friends, Sabby, on the server had been calling for justice for Uptectons, and I think they've had their justice. I will say, though, that we'll need to see them in action, and maybe we will see them in action in this forthcoming tournament, as I know that Arbuz Budesh has been building a couple Optectons here and there. He still thinks that the Synod is like the superior structure, which is fine, but it's interesting there. Obviously, HitEmUp has been starting to use them a bit more, and has been enjoying them. And so, there's definitely some use of them spiking up again. We'll have to wait and see about that, if that's going to be a big thing or not. And I will also say that, I don't know, it's really cool to me to see how many people are... We can just actually go to that. Let's just go to the fact that the Fraud of July is actually here. It's on the way, I should say. And when we're talking about weekend tournaments, just look at this bad boy. Like, we are talking about having received 18 signups so far, and they are perfectly aligned to be Terran, Protoss, and Zerg in every single group. Now, you'll notice that groups A and B have 2 sets of 3 players each. That is because we are going to be running parallel groups where we essentially have the upper card and the undercard is sort of how I'm thinking about the upper card, lower card sort of situation. So the upper card is kind of like isolating people into groups of 3. The format for our invitational tournaments has hitherto been this group system where you kind of spend about 2 to 3 hours per group, and you play out games until one player has won 4 matches. If it's a tie after 6 games where everybody is 2 for 2, we decided on an FFA, which is very cool, very exciting. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens here. But essentially, you'll notice that right up and early, our first player in the list is none other than Mystery Meat. He is returning for real this time. He was going to return for our last invitational, the May Royal Invitational, but was eventually at some point he got locked out of his apartment. But I guess he found his keys, because here he is making it rain. I'm expecting a lot of Ackmed. I'm expecting a lot of anchors. We'll have to see, though. I'm not sure what his style is like these days. He is going to be going up against Arbuz Budesh's Protoss and the Night Fox's Zerg. So, if I had to bet on all these groups, we were actually having a conversation about that in the server just before I went with the recording on this, started that. The cool thing looking at this is that I feel like I could probably call a winner to all of these groups in advance, with the exception of Group D. That one's very open to me. However, just because I can call a winner doesn't mean I'm super confident in it, right? Like, I would have to say that Arbuz Budesh and Top Ramen are favorites in their respective upper card groups. But that doesn't mean that 3Crow can't get some cheeky Protoss action on, that Krankendow can't come up with some really nice plans and deploy them and really surprise and shatter his opponents, that the Night Fox isn't going to be able to just rely on aggression. He has a fairly aggressive style, actually, at least when it comes to versus Terran. I'm not sure about his versus Protoss. I haven't seen it too much. And obviously that Mystery Meat himself can't just go immediately back to winning ways after getting a little bit of practice in, if he's going to be able to get that at all. So I don't know. It feels like those groups should be easy to call, but I never in practice feel like they are. And we're getting to that point where we have a lot of players that are just like, a lot of them have improved a lot, and a good number of them are also brand new. And so that's kind of exciting unto itself. I will say, I don't think any of the new guys that have never participated in a tournament before, them being because technically Arbuz Budesh did participate in the May Royal Invitational. He was like an emergency stand-in, and he ended up doing pretty well for himself. But the new guys, the brand new guys, are Ling Champ in Group A's undercard, Toyota Miguel and Myriad Colors, and Killface. That's a fully fresh group, is the undercard for Group B. Group C is Son of Alcatraz, and Group D is Jujic. So we have a new player in all of those situations, like a tournament debutant in all of the undercard situations. I would consider Group C and Group D undercard just because there's not like a upper tier player. Although, again, Group D is pretty spooky. Jack would probably be the closest to, say, like a Class 1 in Ascendancy or something like that. We could see him get up there. But it's really cool to see what's happening here. I think, again, Jack looks like he should win Group C, but Eggs could be surprised. I've never seen Alcatraz play, so like maybe he's pretty good. That's one of those things that's like a total black box to me. And then we look at Group D, and it's like, yeah, Jujic probably should take this on the macro side, but Btyb will probably 7-pool every game, and Lucifirius will probably Terran cheese every game in different ways between Wraiths and Hurricanes and Anchors and who knows what. So it feels like it's really difficult to call any of these particular groups, and it just brings a smile to my face to know that even though I might be able to kind of predict a couple of things, like maybe I'll even call all of the winners. Like I would say it's probably, Arbuz Budesh, the Beaver 99, Top Ramen, and Myriad Colors. And then probably after that, it would be Jackie Langsky, and I guess I'd just go ahead and say Jujic because of the macro. But like, again, there's so much that could be different here. There's so many things that could go differently. If Mystery Meat has some crazy shenanigans planned, if, Krankendow or 3Crow come up and surprise, like these are situations to me that I just look at that and I think, God damn, like it's really cool to be a part of Cosmonarchy at this point and say, and just feel like, like there's some really sick plays, some really crazy pairings here. And so I'm very excited for this tournament. As you can see in the bottom, it will be on Saturday, the 13th of July, 2024, which is Iskatumesk's birthday. I believe he will be joining us for at least some of the groups on the cast. And we'll have to wait and see if he wants to, I don't know if he's going to be like an emergency ringer as he often was back in the day. Maybe he'll end up doing that. But technically this is all for Class 2s. And I will say that, or Class 3s, right? The underclass invitational part is definitely important. I will say, though, that some of the people in the upper cards, they could go straight back to straight up to Class 1. Mystery Meat could go straight back to Class 1 after not playing for a very long time. That could occur. That could happen. And it depends on like their performance here. Like, does Top Ramen just totally smoke everybody in his group? Well, that's probably a good graduation ceremony for him in that situation, But I also don't mind being a little bit more stingy with Class 1 handouts because we're starting to get a really nice pool of 3s and 2s. And when you have that kind of like strong sort of pyramid shaped foundation where it's like a lot of people at 3, less people at 2, you can afford to have the tip of the pyramid be really, really significant, So, that's the elite club, home to only a few. So that could very well be the case. But, hey, we will have a tournament for champs and potential champs, shall we say, the upper echelons of Class 2 and, of course, all of Class 1. That will come at the end of this month. And then it looks like August will be Acropolis number 2. So stay with us for that. I'm very excited about how just how far we're gonna go with all this stuff. But I figured I'd point all that stuff out because it's an exciting time. And as promised, I think we can probably go straight into the community roundup. There's actually not that much to talk about when it comes to maps. I will jump in and show you guys Radium, which is an altered version of none other than Axiom. You'll see that I believe the choke for the natural has been widened as an example. It does look to me like we have 8 mineral fields, unlike Genesis Y. The areas where the neutral reservoirs were placed and the neutral ridges off to the sides have been converted into island bases where it's actually quite easy to harass the worker lines. So that's a little bit interesting. There's the low ground bases, making use of the asteroid tiles in the middle of the map, but also in the sort of 3 and 9 o'clock positions, which are kind of interesting. I'm forgetting that I can actually just use my mouse to... Oh no, can I? Yes, I can. I can use my mouse to indicate stuff. So yeah, we're talking about these bases here, the 3 and 9 positions, although I guess it's upper 3, lower 9, because lower 3, upper 9 is the island bases that I was talking about. So those are the islands on the low ground. You have similar-ish top left and bottom right spawn, or not spawns, but positions for those expansions, and similar-ish 12 and 6s. So, like, I feel like a lot of the layout is actually pretty similar. However, it is worth noting that there's no high ground pillars allowing you to kind of wall and safely take your third base. So this one is a little bit harder to wall. I mean, the solar array is actually, the black tiles here, these are entirely unbuildable, including the spots that are a little bit more on the blue side. So when we're talking about this, it's more like you'd have to go here and here and here. So like the wall would have to be really like a little bit more committed, which is kind of interesting as a design decision, because it does mean that in order to take that position, you might need to expend a little bit more in the terms of your your general base layout might need to be a little bit more further forward for some of that stuff. But we've got I love the detail in the middle. Even though it looks like it was just the same tile copy pasted, and for some reason we've got weird artifacting on the tiles. That might be a tile set thing, but I'm pretty sure I fixed that a while ago, so I'm not really sure what that's all about. But besides that, and besides some of the other issues like this tile being Btyb, which happens all the time, it seems like, there's definitely some interesting things to look at on this map, and I feel like it'll be a fine sort of successor to Axiom, where we could put Axiom into the retirement home, so to speak, the class 3, the bloodbath, and move this one into class 1 in theory. But anyway, it's a new map. It's in Uprising right now. You can take a look at it as you like. And that's actually all we have for maps. I mean, there was an update to Fields of Cernunnos by the Shambler to turn it into a 2v2 map that I would have loved to talk about, but he didn't make a map image, so I will not do that myself right now. However, that's just something to point out for in the future. If people are hanging out and trying to get their maps talked about on Pr0totype and demonstrated, you got to make sure that the map image is part of your attachment. Otherwise, I'm just going to be like, I guess there was a map update, but I'm not really 100% sure about that. So there is that for you. Now, as I open up the server, I will start to talk about some of the people who have joined us most recently. I will say as well, it's kind of interesting that we have had a number of people pop in, like Myriad Colors, for example, who's been playing. He's a fairly recent addition. I talked about him a little bit in the last episode, I believe. And then we talk about Killface joining, who's also going to be part of this tournament. The other people who joined recently that are part of the tournament are Lingchamp and Son of Alcatraz. So that's pretty cool. There's a potential for some of the other guys to maybe sign up. Actually, I think Neblime has been trying to court Kilo Dusk, K-Dusk, as a potential member of Clan Ass, but also as a potential tournament player, and that would be really cool. I've only heard things about this guy, but he's a fairly new person. He's been around for a couple months now, I think, so he's not somebody who's brand new, but I figured I'd shut him out here as well, in case he watches these. And so, yeah, we've had a number of other people who popped in recently that didn't sign up for the tournament and thus do not deserve my shout-outs. No, that's not true. We have the Sergio, we have Kaboomwer, and we have a couple of others here and there that I'm just kind of looking at, and I'm like, what do we got overall for people? It's some of them have been kind of active. Some of them have been playing a lot of games. So shout out to you guys, and I of course appreciate it. We're fast approaching 600 members on the Discord server. So if you want to throw your hat in the ring and be here before we cross that threshold for whatever reason, maybe that's some trivia for the future. You can join, and the link is in the description, of course. And that will take us neatly over to the coffee questions. I am always a fan of this section because it allows me to give back to the people who have given us a little bit of cash flow down the years now, down the at least year plus that the coffee page has been up and running. And I feel like as we get pretty deep into the thick of things, and as we get to the point where we're feeling like, Cosmonarchy is getting to that finished point, at least a point where we can say it's mostly finished, it just needs content, and then I can work on the campaigns and stuff. We're doing some significant work across all facets of the project, and a lot of it just wouldn't have been possible without the financial support of the donors. And of course, the other thing to point out here is that tournament prize pools are entirely community funded. Sometimes I put up a little bit of my own money, but it's like, I think I've probably put up less than 100 of my own dollars towards all of the prize pools, and we've definitely paid out more than 1,000. So just to point it out, like I've personally funded less than 10% of all Cosmonarchy winnings. A lot of that has been community. So those are rough estimate numbers. It's probably even more than that the community has raised. So I just figured I would point that out. But really, really cool stuff, and I appreciate it very much. So let's get straight into the questions. Just as a reminder, donating $3 or more currently allows you to ask me a question every time I record one of these episodes, which is normally every week, but things have been a bit slow lately. That is a perk you get. You just have to link your coffee account to your Discord account, and then you will automatically gain access to the right channels and be assigned the right roles and get notified when I'm opening up threads for questions. And it comes with a couple of other perks, such as being able to access our donor-only streams if you're at the right tier. So there's all sorts of cool stuff that you can do there. Just check out the memberships tiers page when you go to the coffee page, and you can see that. Starting off, we are going to be talking about Btyb's question. He asks, how do you feel about pushing for more casual game modes for nights and game nights and tournaments? I think it would be fun to put an emphasis on them, especially for team games. So what Btyb is referencing is that we have a number of game modes that he himself has bountied. I'm pretty sure he's responsible for all of the game modes that have been added. There's the Turning, Uprising, Massacre, Omnipresence. There's at least a couple of more that I'm forgetting about. Faction Wars being one of them. So like, there's a lot of game modes that are out there for the Cosmonarchy where it kind of takes the existing rule set and changes it a lot. And a lot of those, I mean, they do need more development. They do need more time and updates here and there to be like feeling like they're fully activated, right? But the cool thing for me anyway is the fact that they exist at all means that there's a couple of things that you can do if you're, I've grown to be a bit more of a believer in this as I've, experienced more games and tried to play them a little bit more, I guess you could say casually, with my brother, my younger brother, who doesn't have the same itch as I do, where I could just play not single player, but I could play 1v1 or 2v2 or team games and competitive. I could play the real game in air quotes of Cosmonarchy like all day long if I really wanted to. Like I would never really get sick of it. But that's not a constitution that is shared by many, and that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the more casual game modes either. It just means that I don't need them to enjoy the game. But I feel like adding more opportunities for like there to be more casual game modes and game nights where you're talking about, say, there's UMS maps that have recently been a focus of people like 3Crow and actually Btyb a little bit himself, and Lucifirius made the laser tag map and stuff. Like there's these fun UMS maps that you can play that are not like, they might still reward some element of the competitive skill set, like being able to micro very nicely or whatever, but they're not really about playing the full game. I used to just sort of turn my nose down at that, and the same way as like Fastest or whatever, right? It's like, I was just like, oh, whatever, you're not even playing the real game. But there's people out there who, I mean, for one, would play those religiously, which is like a little bit different because they're kind of playing it competitively in a sense where they're playing it enough that they get really good at it. So it's not really the same thing as like, there might not be a competitive scene for like cat and mouse or something, but people are playing it and taking it seriously. So there is that. But there's also the fact that like there's a lot of people who just maybe they get burnt out from the competitive stuff after a couple of games, and now they want to switch gears into something a bit more casual. And, instead of playing a game a different game, or going to a different community or something, they can stay within our community, they can continue playing with our people, and they can just play like a different version of our game in some way. Now, I think it's dangerous to try to do that all the time. I've talked about this at length about things like Stormgate, where they have two very distinct game modes where you're fundamentally playing completely different things, but they're marketing it as if it's like the real game or something. I think you can never really have like a situation where it's not significantly community driven, in my opinion, to deviate from the core game, which is why I like Btyb bountying it and coming up with ideas for it and then sharing his ideas with other people and then sort of like letting the creme de la creme sort of rise to the top, right? In terms of the significance of the ideas or the power of the ideas, the good ones. And so that is significant to me because it's like one of those things where it's like, that's more of a community-driven thing. The UMS maps, that's more of a community-driven thing. Sure, I support it when I can, and when I get bounty to do something related to it, I'll obviously do that because that's, people are paying me to do that. So that's a little bit different. But obviously my main primary focus is going to be on the core game, and that's how it should be for a developer. That doesn't mean that I wouldn't support a game night or a tournament or whatever that's related to that. I think it would be fine and very fun, perhaps, to have a massacre tournament. I don't know that we would play it on the same maps, but maybe we would. Maybe it would be fine. There's built-in handling for destroying gas nodes, so it's not like it's a bad thing or something to have, for example, you can choose to make play a map on standard maps. Like the game modes are designed to work on any standard map, basically. So that's one of the ways that you can think about doing that. So yeah, I think to answer the question directly, now that I've talked a little bit about like the philosophy I have about casual game modes and stuff, I think it would be interesting to do that. I also think that we probably have to start getting a little bit used to community members themselves putting up a tournament and trying to organize it. I know that not everybody is going to have the time to do that. Like Btyb is a very busy man. He barely has enough time to play, and yet he's still signed up for our tournament on the 13th. So hats off to him. And not everybody's going to be able to organize that sort of thing, or maybe they don't want to spend their time adminning stuff or whatever. But I would say that, and again, not to specifically say that Btyb should be the one doing this, but if there is general desire for a massacre tournament, for example, which I think would probably be the most common one. Maybe faction wars would be another one that people would want. We need to spend more time making faction stuff, of course, but that might be something that people would want when we're a little bit closer to having a couple of factional differences in the early stages of the game or what have you. Personally, I think I would be running team tournaments before I run casual game mode tournaments, but if somebody wanted to run the casual game mode tournament and there was enough interest in it that they could actually put it on for even just having like two groups of players or a more standard bracket draw type tournament that's not like the group style King of the Hill tournaments that we have, then they should definitely feel free to do that. And, I would help in whatever ways I can by supplying things like if they're doing a broadcast. They don't need to stream the games and have that be a thing. They can, submit the replays for cast later or something, or maybe I could stream them, but the bulk of the setup would have already been done in advance. I don't know, like I could just be a broadcaster as opposed to broadcaster and admin or whatever. So there's like a couple of things that could be done there, but the division of labor being a little bit more irrespective of the developer is probably the way that those kinds of casual game modes see more light and see more action, because they are necessarily disparate and different from the core game that is my focus and has to be my focus as the dev. But that doesn't mean that there's not a place for them, and I really enjoy having them. I think that they're great for, sort of allowing other players who maybe are a little bit unhappy with, not unhappy with the core game, but they love the core game, but it like takes too much out of them. That would be like kind of the thing I'm talking about. Like, yeah, well, we have stuff that might be more to their liking. So anyway, I figured I would point all that stuff out as part of the answer. And I hope that does answer Btyb's question. I'd be happy to, if I had way more time, if I was like a full-time, like I didn't have to worry about part-time work and I was able to just dedicate all of my efforts and all of my attention to this, which is the dream and will eventually come true as I earn that, then, this is the kind of thing that would probably happen once in a while. But still, even by that metric of having way more time and being able to run a tournament like every weekend or something crazy, I don't know that it would come up as often, right, as like 1v1s and 2v2s would. So hopefully that explains my stance, and hopefully somebody can, if they're not happy with how soon I would run that kind of thing, hopefully other people can band together and do it a little bit earlier than I would. So there is that as the answer. Moving forward, we have HitEmUp's question. HitEmUp asks, would you ever be interested in doing an interview series on community members? It would be interesting to learn about individuals in the community. And I agree with that. There was also, he ended his sentence on a comma. I don't know if he meant to type more and then just hit enter, or if that was supposed to be a period, obviously like the full stop and the comma are right next to each other. But yeah, I would say to answer the question, I would say that we actually did some interview stuff. For example, when Btyb was around in one of the Ascension playoffs last year, we did like a 9 to 10 minute interview segment that we recorded, Mesk and myself recorded with Btyb, because we had to do it pre-recorded because he wouldn't have been, I think we were casting it from a replay, or yeah, I think that's what was happening. He was playing his match before the broadcast, and we got him before he played the match and interviewed him and said, like, hey, you're about to play your match. Like, what are you thinking? And then we casted the match from replays after that. And that was like, because we had to do that in advance, I felt like that actually worked out really well. In the future, I might decide to do most of our interviews in that way. Obviously, when it's like during the battlements phase of Acropolis, for example, it's fine to do it live because everybody's there. But in the situation where you're about to play your game, if somebody wants an interview, before, they want to do an interview before then or what have you, it would be cool to catch up with them and almost be like sideline interviewing. Like, I'm here with Krankendow before he plays his match against Mystery Meat. Krankendow, how are you feeling about Mystery Meat? Are you expecting him to annihilate you because he's 5-0'd his last 10 opponents or whatever? It's like ridiculous interview question you could ask. And then, we have like a 5-minute segment at least. But that's more for like broadcast shoulder content, as they call it, which is basically like, videos that get put up like in the middle of breaks or before a tournament is ready to start or something like that, before a match. So factoring that out of the analysis, because it seems like HitEmUp is talking about dedicated videos that might be going up on the YouTube channel that would be like, 30 minutes to maybe even longer form content, where it is just interviews, like interviewing the people and asking about maybe their personal life more than their playing life, so to speak. So I would say I'd be interested in doing that. I don't know if there would be people on the list. I don't know if HitEmUp would volunteer himself for that, or would say, I really want to learn about Arbuz Budash and stuff like that. I don't know. And I don't know if the people that we would want to ask questions about would be forthcoming in their answers. Some people might not be interested in signing up for the interview. For example, actually, if I take a look, I just mentioned Arbuz Budash, but he actually said he does not want to be interviewed in the tournament. So, maybe he's not as comfortable with the command of the English language, or maybe he just doesn't like talking in general. I don't know the guy very well. I just know that he's a pretty good player and he has some cool suggestions, and I'm really happy to have him as part of the community. But, I always respect people's wishes for whether they want to be interviewed or not. And so, like, just to put to roll back the curtain a little bit here, in stuff like ASL, the players have to do interviews. Like, that's part of their contract, basically. If you're a competitive player and you're contracted to a team, the team, as part of your contract, will say, like, hey, you're liable for these amount of streaming hours. You're expected to do this amount of media, which would be like photo shoots and for the tournament and stuff, or photo shoots for the team, any sort of integrations for sponsors and stuff. So like, we don't have that relationship with people here. We're not paying out that much money. We can't make demands of them other than, they have sportsmanlike conduct and they show up and play the games on time and stuff, which I guess you'd have that under the umbrella of sportsmanlike conduct. You don't want to be late, stuff like that. Besides that, that's pretty much it. So we don't have like expectations beyond that. And it's really cool when people go above those expectations to give us the interview content or that sort of thing. So unfortunately, the interview series, if it was done through video, would end up being, I think, limited to a couple of people, or maybe like half the players, which would still be significant. But I do think that a large number of them would probably only want to be interviewed Maybe if there was a translator present, in the case of Hamster, UD Commander is translated for him a couple of times. In case of Calypso, when he was still around, we had Hoop Thrower, aka Chumbeck. He was translating for Calypso, so that was really cool. So like, there's situations like that where maybe then I could get in on somebody and say like, oh yeah, let's do it with a translator. But I imagine that for the most part, the questions would end up being written out in text form and maybe posted as an article to the website or something like that. And I would be fine doing that as well. So if it's a written interview for those kinds of players and a interview series that's more of a video thing, either one sounds good to me. So yeah, I would be interested. Again, kind of going back to Btyb's answer, were there more time in the day or, more days that I could dedicate to the project where this was my full-time gig, you'd see so much more stuff in general. You'd see a lot more, say unit responses and campaign missions and tournaments. Frequency would be increasing and Ascozy development would be further along and all this other stuff. I try not to think about that because it's not very productive to think about that. But just to point out, like, I'd probably do a lot more stuff like this. I'd go maybe a little bit deeper on really maximizing the power and the potency of our broadcast for tournaments and stuff like that. I would put even more effort than I already do into stuff like that if I had the time to sort of spend on that. So a lot of it is down to my availability and my also my capabilities, but I can improve those given enough time. So anyway, definitely something that I would think about doing in general, but I don't know how high prio that would be, if that makes any sense. So anyway, hopefully that answers the question. We're going to go to Myrian's next. Myrian asks, what are all the concepts for apocalypse devices that have been conceived thus far for the Xibalba regencies? So I had mentioned that, I think in a bit of a throwaway comment somewhat recently in an episode of this show, that the apocalypse device for the Mackerel DOS was actually a mind control device. I'm not 100% sure on whether or not I would do something like this, but I'm leaning towards the idea of there being apocalypse devices of two different tiers, which would mean that there's two apocalypse devices per regency on average, or maybe always. By the way, apocalypse, for those who don't know, is like, it's a way to force a draw that still favors the player that executes the apocalypse, as opposed to the player who is fighting versus that guy. And so what this means is, I've looked at chess games a lot. There was a period of time where I was looking at chess games a lot, and I was noticing that when you have draws for chess, it favors the player who has the lower elo. Like the elo loss is going to be less than a full-blown loss for the player who was favored by the rating. And the elo gain is going to be less than if it was a straight up win for the player who is not favored by the rating. So if you have a 200 rating, these numbers are completely out of whack for chess, but a 200 rating player versus a 500 rating player, and they draw, then the 500 rating player might lose 50 rating. Whereas if they straight up lost to that guy, they would maybe lose 100 rating, and the other guy would gain 100 rating. As like these are just total examples. That's not how elo actually works by the numbers. But you can imagine that sort of situation where like the point gain and loss is attenuated by a draw. And I was thinking, what if, we would have that kind of system anyway for matchmaking rating, because that just makes sense. But what if you had a way to make it so that it wasn't just a draw, because you don't really draw in RTS in the same way. There can be a stalemate, which is really bad in StarCraft 2. Well, I would say StarCraft 2 has like a stalemate system. I don't actually know if it's like a good system. Maybe I'm just too dismissive of it and it actually does solve a problem, but I feel like it was over-engineered. However, I was thinking that what if you had the apocalypse system, which is like a different victory condition or a different end condition, because it's not really a victory, but the way that if you complete an apocalypse, you have essentially rendered the planet unusable, the battleground that you're on unusable, and that means that you have executed on something that your opponent could have stopped and could have done the effort to stop and stuff, but failed to stop. And so it's like a different way. It's a different way of attacking a stalemate. It's a stalemate in a way that you have two sides that are equally powerful in some way, but refuse to like attack into each other, or feel like every time they've attacked into each other, it's rebuffed. So then you spend a vast amount of resources on an apocalypse device to initiate an apocalypse, and your opponent can choose to initiate their own and then start sabotaging yours, or just start using the fact that you used all of your resources on that to like try to equalize it, right? So it kind of forces the issue in a way, is my thinking. And there's also been some debate on whether or not this is even necessary. But as that's what the mechanism of Apocalypse is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a more interesting system for draws and for concluding, what do you call it? Concluding the, yeah, I guess just concluding the game without it being like, oh, I guess both players won or something. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think about, but it's also something that when I do think about it, all I can think of is like how epic it would be. So maybe I'm a little bit clouded on that. Like, again, I don't know if it's actually necessary or important to have something like that in the game, but that's what Apocalypse is. So now that you know what Apocalypse is, I can talk about, what are these devices. So the Mackerel DOS one would again be like, rendering everything under it like a full-blown, like a mind control sort of mind virus type thing that would, it would probably, I mean, it has to be rendered unusable. It's not something that the people going in for the Apocalypse, like it's the equivalent of like blowing up the planet, but maybe the lower tier Apocalypse devices that you can get at like the mid-table tier they would render the planet, useless for a time, which would be different than full-blown detonation of the planet, destruction of the planet or something, right? And so obviously like the Ancifi just have like, very powerful atomic weapons. Some of the Regencies have atomic weapons, I would say. I was going to say a lot, but thinking about it, it's actually only a couple. A couple of the Regencies have atomic weaponry. And, like the Solar Throne would, glass the surface or something. The Mackerel DOS would sort of irradiate the surface with this mind virus that maybe like it's like this drives people insane or something. So it's like it becomes hazardous to exist on the planet to the point where it forces an evacuation. That would be like how you would imagine the Mackerel DOS one being. And then you think about the Omindrasith and how they are. Yeah, the Omindrasith Apocalypse device, I feel like when you're thinking about those, it would have to be something related to the liquid metal, where they maybe just turn the whole planet's surface into that, and it takes some time for that to dissipate, and even after that, the planet is forever changed. So that would be something to think about as far as a device. I know that there's one that essentially destroys the atmosphere. That's the Nadarasatha Apocalypse device that would annihilate any atmosphere and open up the territory to be obviously like significantly negatively impacted by sun, which is kind of funny because it's Nadarasatha. They hate the sun, they hate sunlight, they hate light in general. They try to achieve night, but it's almost like them opening up the penalties of turning what nourishes other life in the sunlight to a weapon against the surface and making it uninhabitable is kind of like an interesting thought for the for what the Nadarasatha are doing. It's like some element of thematic consistency there and coherence there. But yeah, besides that, it's just cool. It's cool to think of these sorts of things. Those are a couple there. The Ancifi ones, obviously, like pummeling the crust and indeed the core with like atomic explosions. Obviously, that's not going to be very nice for the planet given enough volume. And so. Yeah, those are a couple there for you. I can't say that that's all of them because I'm pretty sure I wrote down some more, but those are all that's coming to mind now. So along with an explanation of Apocalypse and what it's for, that is a short list of a couple of the devices there for Myrian's question. Going to the Shambler, he asks, how would you implement humans as a regency in the lore of Xibalba, and what would be some of their cornerstones? Well, if humans were a regency in Xibalba lore, it would have to either be like some weird hackneyed thing where they are transported through time by some other powerful force like Colopoazos or something, or they would have to have lasted so damn long that are they still human anymore? I'm not sure about that. So I guess I would have to say like something like the Dalventhos could justifiably be considered, like, not that the Dalventhos are humans in lore, but like you could imagine a world where that happens, where that's how like humanity has survived, where they've kind of turned inward and kind of laid dormant. And And then when they emerge, they are very, very different than what they were before because of all of the sort of digital, like the growth in the digital lands that they have had, the advancements there and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm not 100% sure. I'm trying to think about this in a way that will be satisfying to answer the question. I would imagine that one of their cornerstones would be about adaptability. I think that humans are, it's kind of like a trope in fantasy that humans are very adaptable. That's why in like D&D they get like an extra skill point or whatever, or maybe it's not in D&D, but in a couple of like tabletop-esque role-playing sort of game engines and a couple of or environments or something like that, humans tend to have a little bit more adaptability, but they're kind of like a master of none sort of situation. In fact, I even echoed that in the design of the Terrans, where you can have like the specialization, but you don't necessarily have as good of a specialization as your opponents do without having to pay a bit more of a premium. So that's kind of like a thing that you can get. Whereas like Protoss, by comparison, obviously in Cosmonarchy, they have really, like, they pay a premium for the specialization, but in order to get like a well-rounded army, you actually need I would say a chorus of their specialists, of their not really specialists in the term of like casting abilities, but a specialist in the term of like they are specialized against this threat or whatever. You need like a nice healthy mix, whereas Terrans have a little bit more flexibility with the individual units, but in order to specialize, need to get a little bit more money spent in that sense. So hopefully that makes sense and is parsable for people. Is parsimonious, as you would say. So I guess, yeah, that would probably be one thing, is that their designs would have a lot of flexibility to them, where they might have deployables, they might have things that are, you know, multi-purpose, basically. Like, I guess they would have a lot of multi-role units, which would necessarily mean that they're not like, they don't excel at both, say, like dealing with crowds of ground units and dealing with high armored air units, but they might be reasonable at both of them. You know what I mean? That's actually like how I would describe the Salamander post its most recent changes, where it always used to hit air, but now it hits air with a separate weapon, and its former attack that was both air and ground is only ground, and so you're giving it two different roles. Well, I guess they're still linked in some way, but you're giving it like its ground attack is anti-air or anti. It deals like, it leaves behind these fields that apply the polyite adhesive and deals a little bit of splash damage. So you can argue that it's a crowd control device versus ground, but then versus air, it's single target. And that's actually pretty similar to the Gorger Core, funnily enough, but obviously the Salamander is ranged and it's like a later tier unit and stuff like that. So if you think about it in those terms, it's like, what is it doing? Well, it can do many things. And so you can incorporate salamanders into your composition in a couple of different reasons. And so I think I would probably take that kind of approach to their design. I don't know that can be called a cornerstone, because that's more of like a guiding principle for the design, but it's not like a single thing that occurs like deployments or reclamation or whatever. That would be unique to Terrans or humans in the setting. Yeah. So that one's a little bit tough, but one of the things I could think about is maybe making it so that all of their vehicles have a pilot associated with them, and that pilot has its own equipment. So you could garrison vehicles, or maybe had to, like they'd come out with a pilot in them when you train them, but you could unload the unit inside and replace it with something else or something, or you could maybe specify what kind of pilot you want, or maybe the kind of pilot you want is dedicated. Is determined based on some other thing, like sort of like an add-on system, but the add-on simply decides which sort of pilot you have. And then different pilots would have different strengths inside the vehicle and outside. And so that pilot program, if you wanted to call it that, would maybe be a cornerstone, right? Pilot program would probably be the name of the cornerstone, something like that. That could be kind of interesting. And then that would have this like flexibility of in the middle of the battlefield where you could unload your pilot and it would be an infantry unit. And so you could throw a different pilot in there. So that could be kind of interesting to think about. I don't know. I'm not sure how flexible that system would actually be in practice, but it's an interesting thing to think about. And so there is that as a concept. I do think that when we're talking about a list of like different other cornerstones or different other ideas for that would be very human in practice, I think there's something to be said for their weaponry being a little bit blunt. So that's where I think that's where it kind of makes sense that the Terrans, for example, in Cosmonarchy have a lot of friendly fire damage. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're besides the Cascathalor, I think that there's like, with a couple of exceptions, Because you also think about like the Star Sovereign glassing and Psionic Storm, but with a couple of exceptions and notable ones at that. The Terrans in Cosmonarchy are the only ones that actually deal regular, like consistent friendly fire damage to themselves. So it's kind of interesting in that way to think of them as like, oh yeah, like this is the race that deals, friendly fire, but as a result, they have a lot of extra splash damage. So it's like a trade-off. So I would think of a bunch of trade-offs that would be kind of like that, and I would try to incorporate those into Cornerstone. So, friendly fire might be another Cornerstone that indicates that they have the ability they have like a disproportionate amount of splash damage, but it also is not ally safe. Again, I don't know if that's Cornerstone worthy, but that would be a thing that I might think about doing as like adopting as like a race. Something that is based on that race stuff. I guess they would probably have a lot of cloning going on, so we could maybe think about that as like they might have the opportunity to train, double units or something. Like we experimented with this a while ago where the vassals and servitors and simulacra would all come out 2 per requisition. And so that was something that we experimented on before deciding that should be a Zerg only thing. And I was never really a big fan of how that worked out. I feel like making it so that it's 1 unit per requisition and just having it be something that you can build a lot of is probably more attractive. And that's the direction we went. But I could see maybe like the reactor system that gives you a parallel queue could be something that's semi-interesting for that sort of thing. That could be something to think about. But all in all, I'm not 100% sure about that. I feel like, obviously there's allegories that you would draw to the Terrans in StarCraft 2 if you did the reactor system. I feel like that's kind of unmistakable. Although Armies of Exego also did this, where I think an upgraded barracks gave you a second queue. So it could, instead of being an add-on, it could be an upgrade to the structure or something. So, like, again, if add-ons are related to pilots or something like that, or you might like add on like some kind of academy type structure to your production, and then that dictates the kinds of pilots that you have. Maybe you get access to other pilots in general, but you can only you use the academy to change the pilot, or maybe when you build the structure, it comes with an add-on. I know that sounds weird, but it would be like a different facility thing that you would click on as part of the structure. I don't know. There's a couple of things I could think about there, but anyway, humans in Xibalba. I guess that's probably how I would do it. Would I imagine that they have stayed alive for long enough to be anything recognizable? Probably not, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't still find a way to make it happen. So there you go. There's an answer to your question and some of the cornerstones I was considering. We're going to Three Crows' question next, and he asks, what are some of the most epic spacecraft to be conceived by Xibalba Regencies? Spacecraft in Xibalba are interesting because I would say that like it really depends on what you mean. Obviously, I think that the Omindris spacecraft, which is the Omindiron, where they just have these enormous screaming metal serpents, that's pretty fucking epic, and for some reason is very attractive to me as like an idea. I think about that as like I've imagined many cinematics for Xibalba, and the thought of like those kinds of things like making landfall by just like chewing into the earth or whatever, chewing into the planet that they're crashing into, and starting to tunnel immediately. That's really fucking cool. So making impact, making landfall from orbit and stuff. Just the awesome power of that and how that works is really interesting to me. So, yeah, that would be one of them for sure. I think the Ansifi longships that they have, that's not going to be the name of the unit, obviously, but that's a class of ship these are where they can deploy, infantry to the ground. So they basically, you can train units inside them and then deploy them all at once after a certain point, you can deploy one unit if you want, but you might want to wait until you can deploy 10. And that's like the late game infantry production that they have is actually like a giant vessel with many turrets and stuff like that. So yeah, there's stuff like that that's really cool, I think. That's definitely one of them that I think is like the most epic one, because they wouldn't have a lot of actual power. You can think of it as like having a bunch of Minotaur lasers, not that they have the multi-target, but like individual Minotaur attacks would just be like scattered around a bunch of turret hardpoints that would just shoot at whatever's within range. So that's probably what would be on top of them. And so they would be more about anti-fighter, if you think about it. Like, they're better at dealing with like light targets and stuff. Maybe some of them would only attack air, and maybe other ones would only attack ground because of like the direction that they're mounted in as well. So there's like that feature. But like the fact that they can produce infantry and deploy them onto the ground directly is really cool to think about. So maybe they would also be able to deploy, bombs that way, munitions or whatever. And there might be a really late game one that can deploy like vehicles, like tanks and stuff. But that's yet to be determined. However, I really like the system that it would be implied for that, and the way that works is like, it's really cool to think about. I think the other one that comes to mind immediately to answer this question with would be the heart worlds that are crafted by Psychora. A piece of them can be deployed to this dimension, and it's basically like, lunar sized or bigger in terms of objects that are made manifest. So you're usually like doing battle on them. They're like outposts that the Psychora deploy, and they like become part of the map, so to speak. I don't know that we would be able to do that in real time as like expanding the map, and suddenly there's like having a Psychora player be able to like travel to an area of the map that is not inhabited and start creating heart world there. But you might be able to like build platforms or something. But anyway, like thinking of that whole heart world thing object as a spacecraft is kind of epic to think about, because you're talking about like a battle moon or whatever. That mess keeps bringing up as like a term. He's never explained what they are, but I assume it's like literally like this lunar like sized object that is spacecraft. And so like, thinking of that in terms of awe-inspiring scale is really cool. It's just, you can't really use that in an RTS sense because you would never be able to fit that much of a unit on the screen. And then controlling it would be a disaster and stuff. So yeah, not really like possible as a unit, but it's still technically, I would argue that it could be construed as a spacecraft. It's just a giant object, right? But it still provides some interesting ideas and fodder for campaign settings and stuff like that. So I figured I would throw that out there as well as something that came to mind. Obviously, any of the Solar Throne or Githrovan spacecraft are going to be pretty significant. There's one that's going to act as like a jump gate between for the Githrovan that essentially acts as like an similar to a Nidus, I guess, but it provides you with the this like waygate sort of thing that lets air units through in addition to ground units, or maybe only air units would be possible. I'm not 100% sure about that. The Githrovans will probably have some kind of thing that's similar to recall, but a little bit different. So I'm not sure about that one yet. And then the Solar Throne, obviously, they're the ones that do the glassing, and they're the ones that do the like their Star Sovereign-esque unit would be able to move while glassing and stuff. So like that's the kind of shit that you might see there, is like the existing Star Sovereign concept turned up to 11 is like definitely something that the Solar Throne has. So worth pointing out, I think. And I guess that's probably it for now. But there's an exciting stuff around the bend for sure. So just hey, if you guys like all these Xibalba theory discussions, just remember that when you donate on coffee, you get us a little bit closer to bringing them into a reality. So just saying. All right, we're going to close it off with Lucifirius, who simply asks Ackmed. And you know what? After he asked that question, I implemented Ackmed the next day, I think. So, or maybe it was 2 days later. I don't know. I can't remember. Probably 3. It wasn't 3, but we'll say 3 because 3. And that's how much I love you guys. So 3. We will close the show there. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Pr0totype. We will be back soon enough with another one. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for donating on coffee, if and when you do. And remember that Ackmed has arrived, so bless your local Hurakan, for he is but an Ackmed clone. GG's, and we'll see you guys later.